I told our organist, Joanne Zarell, I can't resist doing Father Abraham for this Old Testament lesson. We've got to do Father Abraham. She said, fine, I won't be there. She said, it's a good song, but I won't be there. Last week we focused on Abraham, and this week I want to focus on Jesus. There are 3 parts to this gospel lesson, and they cover 3 questions that I think people kind of ask more or less or focus on more or less when talking about Jesus. And I don't know if you ever get into these kind of conversations or hear these things, but I do. And maybe it's just me, maybe you don't. Maybe it's just me, but I know I get them sometimes because I'm a pastor. And I know when they're coming because people come up to me and they go, oh, you're a pastor, let me ask you this. And I go, oh gosh, here it comes. And so the 3 questions or the 3 areas that the gospel lesson talks about are these 3 things. Number 1 is Jesus the guy he claims to be? Number 2 is, where's the bus going? And number 3 is, what is the relationship you ought to have with Jesus? Those are the 3 questions. So number 1, let's keep them straight. I have something to help me keep them straight. Number 1, is Jesus the guy he claims to be? Jesus said to the disciples, there was one point where he said to them, by the way guys, who do people say that I am? And they, well, and he said, yeah, but who do you guys say that I am? Okay. Now, it usually doesn't come across that way to me when I have these conversations with people, and maybe it doesn't come across that way to you either, but I want to do it this way. I want to talk about it this way, because sometimes people will have these conversations with you, and maybe you don't ask these questions of me, but maybe folks will of you, and I guess I want to tell you these things to say. Here's what you might say to them, okay? So here's what I think might happen, because this is what happens to me. Somebody comes up to me and says, did you see that program on, you name it, History Channel, Discovery Channel, CNN, NBC, CNBC, whatever, on how these archaeologists have been digging up, you name it, the tomb of Jesus, Bethlehem, where they've discovered this, and they've discovered new things about Jesus, and here are some new things that they've said about Jesus, and blah, 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 and this kind of stuff, okay? And then you don't know how to answer that, because you didn't see the program. Okay? Or I don't know how to answer that, because then they're starting to tell me these things that these new Bible scholars, archaeologists have said, and I'm thinking like, woohoo, where do they get these things from? Area 51 or something? They're just really weird things that they start to talk about. And I don't know how to answer that. But what Jesus said to the disciples was, who do these other people say, what are these other people saying about me? And what he said to the disciples was, who do you say that I am? Now, the disciples were guys that had been with Jesus. They lived with him, they walked with him, they ate with him. They were in the boat with him when the storm threatened to drown him, and he stood up in the boat and said, peace, be still. They were there. When Jesus broke bread and fish and fed 4,000 people, they ate some of those fish and some of that bread. And they picked up baskets full. They were there when he cast demons into pigs. They were there when he raised the dead and when he cleansed lepers. And these disciples were there. Some of these other people who said, well, Jesus could be this, he could be that. They weren't there for all of those things, but the disciples were there for all of those things. And they wrote them down. Matthew, John. Jesus spoke directly to Paul, especially on the road to Damascus, and Paul wrote letters. Mark and Luke were the students of the guys who were right there, of Peter and the others. They were there. So I guess maybe the best thing to do is if somebody says to you or to me, hey, did you see that program where the scholars did this and this and this? I guess I want to say the best response might be, That's really nice. Have you read the Gospels? Have you read the New Testament? Because I'm not really all that interested in what some guys who are doing research 2,000 years later on all kinds of other stuff, I'm not real interested in what they have to say about what they think might have happened 2,000. I want to know what the guys who are actually there think. Because the guys who are actually there, as far as they're concerned, he's the Messiah, he's the Christ. So what I want to know is when I hear somebody saying, did you read it? I want to say, have you read the New Testament? Have you read the Gospels and the letters of Paul? And maybe they're going to say, well, no, I haven't read them all. And you say, well then, let's talk after you read them. Of course, that means, they might come back to you, have you read them? And then you might have to say, well, okay, then you're kind of opening yourself up to, well, we got to read them together. Okay, I mean, that's pretty obvious, but maybe that's the way it has to go. I mean, one of the things that we often do, but one of the things that we get stuck with in our day and age is we take commentary for actual reporting, right, on the news. I mean, we watch things like the commentators on things like Fox News and CNN and CNBC and even NBC and stuff like that. We take that for actual news, but it's not actually, it's commentary on what might have happened and what we think happened based on all this other kind of stuff. But you understand that one of the most poignant things that's happened in the last week or so is that we're not listening to commentaries about what we think might have happened, and all, is that we're actually listening to, over the last week or so, kids who were at the high school where the shooting happened. Okay? And we're not paying so much attention to politicians talking to each other about this is what we need to do. Kids are actually saying, we were there, this is what happened, this is what you need to do. And that's what we're starting to pay attention to, not talking heads on news commentary. And that's what I say. Maybe that's what we need to pay attention to in the Gospels too. We don't need to pay attention to what this scholar or that as much as we need to say, what does Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, the other disciples, what do they say about Jesus when you or I get into one of those conversations? Hey, did you see the latest thing? I want to say, I don't know what the latest thing has to say. Have you read the Gospels? Have you spent time with the guys who were there? Let's talk once we've spent time together with, and it might be, let's talk once we've spent time together with the guys who were there. That might be the better way to do it. So that's question number one. Is Jesus the guy who he claims to be? How are we going to know this unless we spend time together with the guys who actually knew him? Question number two is, I know I said it odd. Question number two is, what bus are you on? Jesus and the disciples, as they were talking, Peter suddenly realized Jesus was on a bus he didn't want to be on. Okay. Jesus said, okay, now that we've got it figured out that Jesus is the Messiah, he's the Christ and whatnot, let's figure out where this bus is going. Where is that Messiah bus going? It's going to the salvation from sin for all mankind, and it's going through the cross. That's where we're going. That's the destination, and that's the journey. And Peter said, no, hold on, I don't like that, I don't want to do that. And as far as Jesus was concerned, if it's like Jesus driving the bus and, saying, look, Peter, you're either on the bus with me or I pull it over right now and open the door and you can get off. Because there is only one place where Jesus is going, and that's salvation from sin for all humanity. And the journey is through the cross. That's the only way we're getting there. And if you got anything else in mind, you might as well get off the bus right now. there are a lot of people these days who I think want to be driving the bus and have Jesus on the bus with them. You know, if they want to, they're going to this place, or they have that goal, or they have that destination in mind, or they have that political thought, or that social movement, or that whatever, they say, let's have Jesus with us, and we'll bring Jesus along. And I don't think Jesus necessarily wants to get on every bus and go with everybody to whatever their goal is, or whatever their movement, or whatever their agenda is. Jesus just had one thought in mind. I just want to get to the cross and to the salvation from sin for all humanity. And I don't think Jesus would have been above saying, let me off of your bus, because that's not where I want to go. Neither is he ready to say to Peter, you have to stay on this bus. If you don't want to come with me, then you can get off the bus. But there are a lot of people who do that. Oh, let's get Jesus to come on our bus. Or they misread the whole situation. You know, and one of the common ones, and you'll probably hear this, because I do, you'll probably hear this, is the one that says, well, Jesus accepts everybody, so we have to accept everybody, right? Jesus accepts everybody, no matter what they do. Jesus accepts everybody. He gets all kinds of sinners. I mean, look at the New Testament, and they go down the list. You know, he got sinners, and he got divorced people, and he got a guy out of a tree, and he got a woman at a well, and he got a woman who was caught in adultery, and he accepted all of them in their sin. And that's true, but then it makes it sound like Jesus is driving a bus down the street, and he's just picking up all kinds of hitchhikers and letting them on the bus, which is fine. But they neglect to say, but where Jesus is going is to salvation by way of the cross. And he's not above saying to people, firmly but lovingly, if you don't want to go there with me, I'll let you off at the side of the road, like he did to Peter. And there's people that just don't understand it. We're not going to some political agenda. We're not going to some social agenda. We're not going to some civic program. We're not going to some humanity kind of human rights thing, no matter how good it sounds to us. As far as Jesus is concerned, where we're going is to salvation through the cross. That's the deal. And I'll gladly pick up whoever wants to go along. But that's where we're going. The third thing is this one. What's your relationship to him? Jesus goes through all these things and talks about, you know, shame and sin and all this, you know, shame and rejection and all that other kind of stuff. What's your relationship to Jesus? Once you've figured out or come to the notion, the idea, that Jesus is the Messiah, and once you've decided and figured out that his one and only destination and one and only journey is salvation through the cross, then you have to figure out, what is your relationship with him going to look like? And that's an important one these days too, and one that I think a lot of people can relate to for this reason. After the most recent presidential election, there were apparently a lot of people who were somewhat disappointed, shall we say, that Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. And there was quite a movement apparently on social media that expressed their disappointment by saying, let's start a hashtag that said, hashtag not my president. Said, I didn't vote for him, he's not my president. And part of me said, you know, I understand your disappointment, but there was another part that scratched my head and said, well, you know what? If you're a United States citizen and if he's the President of the United States, he is your president, whether you like it or not. So you're kind of stuck with him. You know, you can protest all you want, but he's going to write an executive order that's going to affect you whether you like it or not. He is the president. You know, and part of me, and maybe it's the part that's the son of an old high school principal, wants to say, suck it up. You know, But that's also a part that comes out of what we know about Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus is Lord, whether you like it or not. St. Paul writes in Philippians that there comes a day when every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Every knee and every tongue will bow and confess. And Jesus says that in Matthew 25 that when he comes again in glory, he'll be like a shepherd separating the sheep from the goats, and the sheep will be the ones that he'll welcome into the glory. He'll say, "Come, those who are blessed by my Father, come into the places prepared for you in the glory of my Father," and so forth. And then the ones on the other hand, he'll say, "Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting torment," and so forth. And they'll go where they're meant to go by the judgment of Jesus. But what St. Paul indicates by the power of the Holy Spirit is that every single one of them, no matter where they're going, will be saying, "Jesus is Lord," to the glory of the Father. So the question is, do you want to be saying Jesus is Lord with joy in your heart as you're going off into the places prepared for the blessed ones, to the glory of the Father? Or are you going to be saying Jesus is Lord through clenched teeth, with regret and anger in your heart as you're trouncing off into the places prepared for the devil and his angels, and saying, "God, Jesus is Lord," as you're going off in that direction? Which would be better to do? Now, I'm knowing you folks, and because you're here, I know which group that you're in. Okay, so we're going off into the places prepared by God for his angels and for his blessed ones, and we'll be going with joy. But I'm assuming that we're going to be having conversations with people who maybe aren't necessarily sure which group we're in yet. So the conversation with some of those folks might be, which group would you rather be in? Someday we're all going to have to say, "Jesus is Lord," to the glory of God the Father. Would you rather be saying Jesus is Lord with joy in your hearts as you're going to heaven, or would you rather be saying Jesus is Lord growling and growling as you're going off into the other place? Because either way, Jesus is the Lord. There's no question about it. You can't get around it. It's a matter of fact. Just like Donald Trump is the president, and you can't get around that. There are some questions and some issues that we deal with people periodically, just, because they come up. Who is this Jesus? Because they know you're a Christian. I know they know I'm a pastor, but sometimes people ask you things probably because they know you're a Christian. Hey, you're a Christian, aren't you? Did you see that show on TV? What do you think about this Jesus? What do you think about this whole, what do you think Jesus would do in terms of a social issue or a political issue? Don't you think Jesus would approve of this or that? And maybe the better answer is to say, I do know that Jesus went to the cross for salvation of souls. I don't know what he'd do for a social issue. I know what he'd do for the forgiveness of people and their salvation from sin. That's what I do. We can talk about that. And I do know that Jesus is your Lord and my Lord, and whether you acknowledge it or not, I do know that that's true. Now let's help you to learn more about that so that we can go to heaven together. That's what he would like. In Jesus' name, amen.